What if the greatest miracle of your life didn't arrive as success, but as the rejection that shattered your heart? What if the closed door you've been cursing was actually the only reason your future survived? Stay until the end, because you'll discover why the people who rejected you may have unknowingly protected your destiny, and why the pain you're trying to erase could become the very event that transforms everything you believe about your life. If this message is helping you see your past through a completely different lens, take a moment to subscribe, leave a like, and share this video with someone who still believes rejection means failure. Sometimes one new perspective can free a person from years of unnecessary suffering, and there is much more waiting ahead. The moment rejection enters your life, your conscious mind almost always interprets it as proof of failure. A relationship ends, a dream opportunity slips away, or someone chooses another path instead of walking beside you. Instantly, the mind creates a painful conclusion: I wasn't enough. But this conclusion is rarely the truth. The human psyche is wired to seek certainty, even when that certainty is built upon illusion. Rather than accepting the unknown, it creates a story that blames itself. Yet many of life's greatest transformations begin precisely where certainty collapses. Rejection does not necessarily close your future. It often closes only the future your limited perspective was able to imagine. There is another force quietly operating beneath the surface of your awareness. Deep within the unconscious exists a constant movement towards psychological balance and authenticity. Whenever your life becomes too attached to an identity that no longer reflects your true nature, tension begins to build. Sometimes this tension appears as dissatisfaction, confusion, or emotional exhaustion. Other times it arrives suddenly through rejection. What feels like an external event may actually be the inner world forcing a necessary correction. The opportunity that disappeared, the person who walked away, or the door that unexpectedly closed may all be removing you from a path that would have slowly disconnected you from your authentic self. Think about how often people define themselves through things outside of themselves. They become the successful employee, the perfect partner, the admired friend, or the person everyone chooses. These identities can feel secure because they receive constant validation from the outside world. But the danger is that your entire sense of worth becomes dependent upon circumstances you cannot control. The moment rejection occurs, that carefully constructed identity begins to crack. Although this collapse feels devastating, it exposes an important truth. If your identity can be destroyed by another person's decision, then it was never truly yours. It was borrowed from external approval rather than built upon inner certainty. This is why rejection often becomes an unexpected turning point. Once the illusion begins to dissolve, you are forced to ask questions you previously avoided. Who am I without this relationship? Who am I without this career? Who am I when nobody is applauding me? These questions may feel uncomfortable, yet they open the doorway to genuine self-discovery. Instead of chasing validation, you begin searching for meaning. Instead of asking why someone rejected you, you begin asking what part of yourself has been waiting to emerge all along. That shift changes everything. The energy once spent trying to reclaim what was lost becomes the energy used to create a life that reflects your deepest values. Years later, many people look back and realize that the rejection they once resisted became the beginning of their greatest miracle. Had that relationship survived, they might never have discovered their independence. Had they received the promotion they desperately wanted, they might have remained trapped in work that slowly drained their spirit. Had every door opened exactly as expected, they might never have encountered the opportunities that truly belong to them. Rejection is not always life saying no. Sometimes it is life quietly whispering, "There is a path you cannot yet see, but one day you will understand why this door had to close before the right one could ever open." Emotional pain is one of the few experiences that every human being desperately tries to avoid. The moment heartbreak, rejection, betrayal, or disappointment enters our lives, our first instinct is to escape it as quickly as possible. We distract ourselves, search for answers, blame others, or convince ourselves that time alone will erase the wound. Yet pain has a strange quality. The more we resist it, the more deeply it settles into the unconscious. What we refuse to face does not disappear. It simply waits beneath the surface, quietly influencing our decisions, relationships, and beliefs without our awareness. Every painful experience carries a hidden message, but that message is rarely visible in the beginning. Instead, emotional suffering acts like a mirror that reflects parts of ourselves we have ignored for years. A rejection may expose an overwhelming need for approval. A betrayal may reveal how much of our identity depended on another person's acceptance. A failure may uncover fears that have silently controlled us since childhood. These discoveries are uncomfortable because they challenge the image we have built of ourselves. Yet without discomfort, these hidden patterns would remain buried, continuing to shape our lives from the shadows. The unconscious does not speak through logical arguments alone. It often communicates through emotion, dreams, recurring fears, and moments of psychological crisis. When emotional pain becomes intense, it is often because something deep within your inner world is demanding attention. The wound is not simply asking to be healed, it is asking to be understood. Every tear, every sleepless night, and every moment of confusion can become an invitation to explore what has been neglected inside you. The greatest danger is not feeling pain, it is silencing the lesson that pain is trying to teach. This is why some people emerge from suffering stronger, while others remain trapped by the same experience for decades. The difference is rarely the amount of pain they endured, it is the meaning they gave to it. Those who view suffering only as punishment often become prisoners of bitterness and regret. But those willing to examine their inner world begin transforming pain into wisdom. They stop asking, "Why did this happen to me?" and begin asking, "What is this experience trying to reveal about me?" That single question shifts the focus from helplessness to growth, turning suffering into a catalyst rather than a life sentence. Years later, many people discover that the moments they once begged life to erase became the very moments that awakened them. The heartbreak that felt unbearable taught them self-respect. The failure they feared became the beginning of a more meaningful path. The rejection they thought destroyed them uncovered a strength they never knew existed. Emotional pain is rarely the end of your story. More often, it is the doorway through which your deeper self begins to emerge. What feels like your greatest burden today may one day become the reason you finally understand who you were always meant to become. One of the most painful experiences a person can endure is not the loss of another person. It is the loss of the identity they believed they were. Long before rejection ever arrives, many people unconsciously build a version of themselves around approval, achievement, relationships, or social recognition. They begin to believe, "I am valuable because I am loved. I matter because I am successful. I exist because others choose me." These beliefs become so deeply rooted that they feel like truth. But the moment rejection enters, this carefully constructed identity begins to crack, revealing that it was never built on solid ground. The false self is not created overnight. It develops slowly through childhood experiences, social expectations, family influences, and repeated attempts to earn acceptance. Over time, people learn to hide parts of themselves that seem unacceptable while exaggerating the qualities that gain praise. They smile when they want to cry, agree when they want to disagree, and chase achievements that impress others rather than fulfill their own spirit. Eventually, they become strangers to themselves, living a life designed to maintain an image instead of expressing their authentic nature. The tragedy is that many never realize this has happened until rejection strips the mask away. This is why rejection can feel so devastating. It does not merely remove a person, a job, or an opportunity. It threatens the entire identity built around those things. Suddenly, the questions become impossible to ignore. If this relationship is over, who am I now? If this career disappears, what remains of my worth? If no one is applauding me, Do I still have value? These questions are frightening because they force the collapse of illusions that once provided emotional security. Yet the destruction of illusion is often the beginning of genuine freedom. Only when the false self begins to die can the authentic self finally breathe. At first, this transformation feels like chaos rather than progress. There may be loneliness, uncertainty, and the uncomfortable silence that follows the loss of familiar roles. But beneath that silence, something remarkable begins to happen. You stop performing for acceptance and start listening to your own inner voice. Your decisions become guided less by fear and more by meaning. You no longer seek relationships simply to avoid loneliness or chase success merely to prove your worth. Instead, you begin creating a life that reflects your deepest values, even if that path looks very different from what others expect. What once felt like emptiness slowly becomes space for something real to grow. Years later, many people realize that the greatest gift rejection ever gave them was the death of the person they were pretending to be. Had everything gone according to plan, they might have continued wearing the same mask for the rest of their lives, mistaking approval for happiness and validation for identity. But rejection interrupted that illusion. It dismantled the false self piece by piece until only authenticity remained. And in that painful yet powerful transformation, they discovered a truth that could never have been learned through comfort alone. The strongest version of yourself is not the one the world applauds, but the one that remains standing after every mask has fallen away. Every rejection awakens something far deeper than disappointment. It stirs emotions that have often been hidden for years: fear of abandonment, feelings of unworthiness, jealousy, anger, and insecurity. Most people believe these emotions are created by the rejection itself. But in reality, rejection merely uncovers what was already waiting beneath the surface. These hidden parts of the personality do not appear because life is trying to punish you. They emerge because they have been ignored for too long. The moment someone walks away or a dream falls apart, the inner world begins revealing the wounds that have silently shaped your behavior all along. These hidden aspects of yourself are often what psychologists describe as the shadow, the collection of emotions, desires, fears, and traits that you have pushed out of conscious awareness because they seemed unacceptable or painful. You may have spent years pretending to be strong while secretly fearing rejection. You may have appeared confident while quietly believing you were never enough. You may have acted independent while desperately craving approval from others. As long as life remained comfortable, these hidden parts stayed in the background. But when rejection strikes, the shadow steps into the light, demanding to be acknowledged rather than denied. This is the moment where two very different paths become possible. One path is resistance. You blame the other person, seek revenge, numb the pain with endless distractions, or convince yourself that nothing is wrong. The shadow remains hidden, continuing to influence your relationships and decisions without your awareness. The second path is far more difficult, but infinitely more rewarding. Instead of running from the pain, you become curious about it. You ask yourself why this rejection hurts so deeply. What belief about yourself has been exposed? What fear has suddenly become impossible to ignore? These questions begin transforming emotional suffering into self-understanding. As you continue this inner work, something remarkable happens. The emotions that once controlled you begin losing their power. Fear becomes courage because it has finally been faced. Insecurity becomes confidence because it is no longer hidden behind masks. Loneliness becomes self-acceptance because your happiness is no longer entirely dependent upon another person's presence. You realize that your greatest weakness was never the rejection itself. It was the unconscious belief that your value depended on being accepted by everyone around you. Once that illusion fades, you begin standing on a foundation that no external opinion can easily shake. This is the unexpected gift hidden inside every painful rejection. The experience that once seemed determined to break you becomes the very force that introduces you to parts of yourself you never knew existed. Your shadow, once feared and avoided, becomes one of your greatest teachers. It exposes the fears that kept you small, the beliefs that limited your potential, and the emotional wounds that silently directed your life. By embracing these hidden parts instead of rejecting them, you become more whole, more resilient, and more authentic than ever before. In the end, the miracle was never that rejection disappeared. It was that it led you to discover the strength that had been waiting within you all along. One of the hardest truths to accept is that not every person who enters your life is meant to remain there forever. We often assume that if a relationship ends, it must mean something went terribly wrong. We replay conversations, question our worth, and search endlessly for the mistake that caused someone to leave. But sometimes the ending has very little to do with your value. Instead, it has everything to do with your growth. Life has a mysterious way of removing people who can no longer accompany the person you are becoming, even when your heart desperately wants them to stay. Human beings naturally become attached to familiarity. We cling to relationships because they provide comfort, identity, and a sense of emotional security. Yet comfort and growth rarely travel the same road for long. There are people who support the version of you that feels small, dependent, or afraid, because that is the version they have always known. As you begin to change, your priorities shift, your boundaries become stronger, and your understanding of yourself deepens. Not everyone will be able or willing to grow alongside you. Their departure is not always a sign of failure. Sometimes it is evidence that your life is preparing for a different chapter. This is why certain separations feel so confusing. You may have loved sincerely, given your best effort, and still watched the relationship fall apart. Your conscious mind searches for a logical explanation, but not every ending can be explained by logic alone. Some people enter your life to awaken qualities within you, teach difficult lessons, or prepare you for experiences that could not have happened without them. Once their purpose has been fulfilled, the relationship changes. Holding on too tightly to what has already completed its role only prolongs suffering and delays the next stage of your personal evolution. When someone leaves, there is often an empty space that feels unbearable at first. The silence can seem like proof that something precious has been lost forever. Yet empty spaces are not merely places of absence, they are places of possibility. The energy once devoted to maintaining a relationship that no longer aligned with your deepest self becomes available for new opportunities, healthier connections, and greater self-understanding. Slowly, you begin investing in your own growth instead of chasing people who have already chosen a different path. What once felt like abandonment gradually transforms into freedom. Years later, many people look back with gratitude at the very departures they once mourned. They realize that if those people had stayed, they might never have discovered their own strength, pursued their true purpose, or met the individuals who genuinely appreciated them for who they had become. The relationships that ended were not always punishments. They were often transitions. Life was not taking something valuable away. It was creating the space necessary for something more authentic to arrive. The miracle was never in forcing people to remain. The miracle was discovering that every goodbye carried the quiet invitation to become someone you could never have become if they had stayed. There are moments in life that seem impossible to understand while they are happening. A relationship ends without warning. A dream you've spent years pursuing suddenly falls apart. An opportunity you believed would change your future disappears overnight. In those moments, the mind naturally labels the experience as failure, tragedy, or bad luck. You wonder why life would allow something so meaningful to slip through your hands. Yet the greatest paradox of human existence is that many of life's most extraordinary blessings first arrive wearing the mask of unbearable loss. What feels like destruction today may actually be the beginning of a future your present mind is simply unable to imagine. The human mind is deeply attached to certainty. It creates plans, expectations, and stories about how happiness is supposed to unfold. When reality refuses to follow those expectations, we assume something has gone terribly wrong. But life is not always interested in protecting your plans. It is interested in expanding your potential. Sometimes the path you desperately wanted was too small for the person you were capable of becoming. The closed door was not evidence that your journey had failed. It was evidence that your journey was changing. The pain came not because your future had been stolen, but because your old expectations had to die before a greater possibility could emerge. Many people spend years grieving what they lost, without realizing what that loss prevented. They never see the invisible dangers they avoided, the unhealthy relationships they escaped, or the opportunities that only became possible because another door had closed. Imagine receiving everything you once begged for, only to discover years later that it would have trapped you in a life that slowly drained your spirit. Some miracles do not appear by giving you exactly what you asked for. Instead, they protect you by removing what would have quietly limited your growth. Looking backward, the pattern often becomes clear. The very events that felt cruel at the time were silently redirecting your destiny towards something far more meaningful. This realization changes the way you experience future disappointments. Instead of immediately assuming that rejection means defeat, you begin asking a different question. What if this is creating space for something I cannot yet see? That question does not erase the pain, but it transforms your relationship with it. Hope replaces helplessness. Curiosity replaces bitterness. Rather than clinging to what has already ended, you become open to possibilities that were previously invisible. You stop measuring your life only by what you have lost and begin paying attention to what new doors are slowly beginning to open. Eventually, there comes a day when you look back at the rejection that once brought you to tears and realize it was never your enemy. It was the turning point that reshaped your entire life. The person who walked away forced you to discover your own strength. The opportunity you missed pushed you toward a calling that fit your true nature. The dream that collapsed made room for one far greater than anything you could have imagined. In the end, the miracle was not that life spared you from pain. The miracle was that life refused to let you settle for a future that was smaller than the one you were truly meant to live. Looking back, you no longer see a story of rejection. You see the quiet wisdom